Ahoy there, Captain Benzie here, coming at you with another episode of Hard to Port, the series where I take a look at various different Android ports of classic video games to let you know whether or not I think they're worth your time and money to download, whether they made that jump well, or whether they were apparently hard to port. If you do enjoy these videos, let me know by hitting like on them, and consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already for all things mobile gaming. Let me know what videos you'd like to see in the future, either in the comment section down below, or on the various different social media channels you see along the bottom of your screen now. Right, that said and done, let's jump into rtype. Now, rtype is a classic side-scrolling 90s space shooter, the kind of like Gradius and all that kind of thing. It was a very popular game back in the days. I had this on my Game Boy. You could also get Super rtype, there's rtype 2, rtype 3, rtype Delta. And ultimately, rtype itself was ported to goodness knows how many different platforms during its time. During the 90s, there must have been literally dozens upon dozens of ports of each of the games, and I loved it. I loved it as a kid. So when I saw that there was an Android version of it, yeah, 100% I needed to give it a download, give it a try, and see how it did. Now, of course, as with all games and as with all like things on this series, what I try to do is I go in with the control scheme based on the ones that come installed in the game, you know, just ones that require just your phone. There is a touch version and a pad version. I'm going to tell you now, ignore the touch version. The touch version is horrific. It is impossible to control. In a game like rtype, where you need a decent amount of accuracy, touch is just horrific for this. You kind of slide your finger around to move the ship, you still tap buttons for shooting, ignore touch, go with pad, and you can configure it. You can change the size, the opacity, and the positions of the buttons. You're going to need to, because the standard setup is absolutely ridiculous. Anyway, what I'm going to do is, of course, I'm going to jump into rtype, I'm going to talk about the game, and whether or not this port is any good whilst playing it. Then, once I've got my first game over, I will jump back in using a controller, and we'll talk about how that changes things. Because ultimately, I like using mobile gaming controllers on my phone. I think it adds a layer of sort of extra control, and I find it kind of fun. Anyway, rtype, as you can see, is a classic side-scrolling space shooter. As I said, these were the kind of games that were very popular in the 90s. Seemed there was a new one coming out every day. Crikey, ouch, that hurt. But essentially, the idea is that you fly through wave after wave of enemies, you avoid incoming fire, you avoid the scenery like I didn't just then, and you do collect power-ups. Now, rtype was fairly unique amongst the time in that the power-ups weren't just for your ship, crikey, but for a thing called a pod, which you'll see me get now. Now, the pod can actually be attached to the back of your ship, you can jettison it and let it fly and do its own thing solo, or you can attach it to the front of your ship too. It does actually act like a shield against most shots in the game, but not that one, typically. And you can use that to kind of, as I said, you can use it as extra weapons, and it does get upgrades as well, different weapon types, like a bouncing laser, whether it fires missiles. Sometimes you can get it to fire like literal fire that hits the floor and then travels along, which is great for taking out low-lying turrets and things like that. There's all kinds of upgrades for it, and that's kind of the point of the game here, that you are going to be flying this ship around and just trying to kill everything, getting as high score as you can, get as many upgrades as you can, and try and, well, complete the game. This is classic, like, 90s gaming. It doesn't take itself too seriously. There's not all that much going on. The storyline is very simple. The Bido Empire have invaded, and you, in your one ship, have been sent in, to go and save the day. As you can see, I'm going to say straight up and down now, this game's on-screen pad is not easy to use. I really love this game to pieces, but it is so difficult to use. The fact is, I know this game inside out from years of playing it. I can tell you pretty much every enemy that comes in at any time, and the best ways to beat it, but actually trying to pull that off with the mobile on-screen controls is almost impossible, just because of how sort of loose that pad's reaction is. The fact that it's got a dead zone in the middle that just doesn't actually do anything. I'd much rather this was a proper pad, and it just kind of feels really sensitive. It's so tricky to get exactly like the left and the right and the up and the down. You can see all the different upgrades I'm getting here, and I love this big blasty beam thing. But this pad is actually really tough to use. It's not impossible to use. I'm not going to say, oh, it makes the game impossible to play. It doesn't. It just makes it much harder. So if you're kind of the person who just wants to pick up and play quickly, and you don't want to use a mobile controller, bear that in mind, that this pad is ridiculously sensitive and actually quite awkward to use. The buttons are fine. I don't have a single problem with those at all. Yay, first boss. Let's get the pod into position. Try to, and now. There we go. And you can see the pod doing its thing there as well. Do power shots. That hasn't quite got into the position I'd like it to. Ultimately, the point I'm trying to make here is that this game is fantastic, but this pad is absolute tripe. I'm not going to lie, that pad makes things ridiculously difficult to do on this. And rtype, as you can see, it is a tough game. You know, there's a lot going on the screen, and if you die, you lose all of your upgrades, and you're reliant on whatever upgrades you can then quickly harvest. Like here, I can get the missile upgrade. It's not a pod, just the missiles. I can get that missile upgrade, which means I'm going to need to get down here now because I don't have the full safety net that I had of the pod before, which makes things much trickier. When you die, it actually becomes a much harder game until you are back up at the full power. And even there, I'm trying to tap up and I've gone down. You see what I mean about the controls in this game? This is a difficult game, and a D-pad like this just does it no favours. Now, if you sit down and like warm up and get used to that pad, it's not the worst pad in the world, but my god, it really does make things just that little bit trickier to deal with. And on a game like this, you don't want to have to be fighting the control scheme to get those pixel perfect details either. Crikey, and I've missed an upgrade for the pod there. Eek. Let's just hope I can get to the boss. Nope, can't. Game over. But an achievement unlocked. I'm not sure what the achievement is there. Humiliation. Wonderful. Thank you ever so much, game. Right, so that's playing the game with the standard on-screen settings. What I'm going to do now is, of course, let's find out what humiliation was. Game over at first level. Great. What I'm going to do is, essentially, I'm going to jump back to the title screen. I'm going to connect up my Razer Raiju mobile controller, and I'm going to then come back and showcase the game with that. With the Razer Raiju mobile controller now connected, let's see how this changes things. So we've gone from, oh, that's so much better already. We've gone from a game that ultimately is quite tricky to play, is a little bit finicky on its D-pad, requires fairly precision controls that just that D-pad doesn't want to give us. Straight away, we now have a much more elegant, much more fun, much more straightforward control scheme. Oh, that feels so much better. I can actually see and feel what I'm doing now. That pleases me. That makes the game actually playable for me now. So I think actually we can kind of almost call the review part of this right there and then. That if you've got a mobile gaming controller and you want to be able to use it and play it and showcase that off and have fun, you don't mind using the controller for things, this is actually a really great port. It's a faithful port of one of my favourite games as a kid, and one of the first side-scrolling 2D shooters that I played. Ultimately, that ended up getting me into games like Ikaruga later on, and like the proper bullet hell games. But ultimately, the point I'm definitely going to make here is that is just so different, that this port is probably not worth your time if you're just playing the game itself. If you're using just the phone, if you're going to sit there and use a mobile gaming controller as well, this is a faithful port of an amazing little game. Level design in this is just fantastic, and I do love the graphical artwork. It does change from port to port. I think this is the micro graphics version, but yeah, you will have to see. It's not the Super rtype version, that's for certain, and definitely not the Game Boy version, that's for certain. But this is a great little game, and if you've got a mobile controller, this actually is playable. It's, well, more than playable. It's fun. It's well done. I mean, heck, you can see I've managed to get this far just on one ship. I haven't been destroyed yet. Watch as I now get blown up for my hubris of saying that. But how many times had I died using the finicky on-screen controllers? Here, I've made it all the way to the boss using my first ship. That is such a difference, and it's just the difference that a controller makes, for crying out loud. It's... It's kind of depressing because, you know, you see all these... There are some really good mobile games out there, some really good ports as well, of stuff. Nice and easy, boss, just shoot the weak point. Some really good mobile gaming ports that are just let down by the lack of effort, I suppose, put into the controls. It's almost like they tried, then kind of the testers went, yeah, this just isn't working, and the developers went, well, we don't know what else we can do, and just left it at that and said, okay, well, it's just going to be, that's the difficulty curve. Or, yeah, you just basically, we're expecting you to have a mobile gaming controller for this. And so there really is my point. I've said it a couple of times now. I think this is it's an amazing port of the game. It's just not really playable unless you have a mobile gaming controller. Now, I'm lucky, I do. If you don't, you might want to give this one a second thought. If it's just this kind of game you're looking at, then there are better versions of, better mobile shooter and mobile space shooter games like rtype, better games of this genre on mobile. But if it is, if you're wanting to play it because it's rtype and you want those memories, or you just want to go through some classic side-scrolling shooter action and want to see what rtype was all about, it's not a terrible port. Just be aware that you are going to enjoy it so much more if you do have the controller. Anyway, I'm going to stop talking about mobile gaming controllers and all this kind of thing now, and instead, I'm going to focus on just seeing how far I can get on one life. Now, watch as I've said that, I'm going to die in a second. We're coming up on the boss of this level now. You've got this weird worm thing, kind of does a weird dance around the screen. You shoot out all the bits on the side of it, and you see they go sort of that greyish mottled colour. That way they stop firing at you, and now we come to the boss of level 2, this weird, horrid looking thing, and this can actually kind of be cheesed if I can get this right. No, I can't. I completely screw up the cheese, but if you get into that position down there, ultimately you can cheese the boss. You just sit there firing, and the darn thing just dies. Anyway, so that kind of wraps up everything I want to say about rtype. You've seen a lot of the game in action here. Great little port if you've got a controller. If you haven't got a controller, I would give this one a miss. Anyway, folks, thank you ever so much for watching this. If you've played rtype, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Come find me on the various different social media channels I mentioned earlier. They're in the description of this video too. Let me know what kind of games you enjoy playing as ports on Android. I've got tons of little videos for this series already sorted, but I am looking for other just straight-up mobile games to get involved in the meantime as well, while Eve Echoes is still in development. So yeah, just let me know what you guys are playing. I'd love to see what you guys are up to, hear what you guys are doing, and just try out some new stuff as well. Let me know your thoughts below. Otherwise, happy sailing, and thank you so much for watching. See you next time.